Good morning, virtual CMI 2020. I hope you've had a fantastic week. I know I have. I've learned a lot myself, and I'm so thankful that this was put together, even though we can't be at CMI. Urban legend has it that the best is always saved for last, and so it's only fitting that today, the final masterclass for virtual CMI 2020 is Tuba Day. So happy Tuba Day, and we have a fantastic um, tubist and pedagogue for you today in William Russell, and he is the tubist of the Boston Brass, which is just a phenomenal brass quintet that travels all across the country and the world, making top of the line music. And so we have him today. He also teaches tuba and euphonium professionally, and just an internationally renowned soloist. So William, welcome. And we're so glad to have you. And we thank you for coming on and taking the time to talk to us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you, thank you. Though,
So I understand.
if I may correct you on one thing, I don't really think of myself as a soloist. I'm a first and foremost a chamber musician. So I do most of my work in ensembles, and and actually that's going to be part of the things that we're talking about today, kind of the roles of the tuba,
Okay.
and where we can go with it.
Thank you for that
Oh
clarification.
yeah.
Why don't you go ahead? And I know you have some plans for us today.
Oh sure. Well, I think my topic today might be a little different than you've had the rest of the week, and that's all right. Um, I've often done a class that I call Beyond the 5%, and and that was based on this idea. I would say this must have been about 10 years ago or so. There was an article put out, or a study that sort of just broke down the makeup of the music industry, and it probably just actually had, now that I think about it, had to do with record sales in the music industry and just kind of who was making money and who was doing work uh, therein. And it said that classical music made up something like 5% of the music industry as a whole. And I think that might have even been lumped together with something else like jazz, right? And that would have been years ago. And so can you imagine what that number is today? It's rather dwindling, sadly. But that's not something we should, be sad about. Rather, we should be hopeful that there's this other, as I call it, 95% of the music industry that is in some way open to us, or that we need to find a way to squeeze into. Uh, it's kind of like theories of an alternate reality. Maybe there's another you right there next to you, and there's just a membrane of time and space separating us from this other stream of reality. Well, that's kind of there's this kind of membrane that separates us from the other part of the music world, and I think that has a lot to do with improvisation. If you think of a lot of the popular musical arts are based on improvisational skills like songwriting, memorization, uh, other skills like even dancing, that are somewhat improvisatory. Uh, and so I just want us to be aware of that, especially as tuba players. We are especially pigeonholed quite often in terms of our role, even within the small world of classical music. We a lot of us have dreams and aspirations of being a maybe an orchestral or a player or a bandsman, or there's not a lot of roles out there that are like sanctioned, official, and that are like we consider to be the cream of the crop sort of positions or jobs or roles. And Boston Brass had a bit of an online seminar the other week, and one of the presenters on tuba for that was Joanna Ross Hersey, who is a wonderful tuba player. She played with the Coast Guard band. So there's, of course, is another example of a job for tuba players that gets thought of pretty highly, and that is the service bands. And she said something about, we have this narrow view of the world, and all you have to do is kind of turn a little to the side, and you see there's so many other things going on, like teaching. And for me, I turn a little bit to the side here, and there's this world that I play a lot of, New Orleans second line music. Right? I play so much New Orleans second line music that I had to buy a sousaphone a few years ago. That's how crazy it was getting. And that kept me employed during, leaner times when I wasn't getting certain gigs, or, everything is sort of cyclical in the world of music. So you can't count on everything all the time. So at any rate, that's kind of been my link into not just this other side of music. For me, it's mostly been jazz because that's a common role of the tuba. But also I play in a funk and a hip hop cover band that's all brass. I play in another quartet that writes original songs, and is sort of a funk classical chamber music vibe. And then of course I'm playing with Boston Brass, which is a band that tries to play really high level classical music, and also where all the members improvise in jazz and pop settings as well. So, and obviously I wouldn't be in that group if that wasn't part of my skill set. So I'm going to try and share some ways I think we can all maybe get into that direction. I know some people sometimes think, well, if I start practicing jazz, isn't that going to hurt my classical playing? Am I going to suddenly turn into a lead trumpet player that's shrill and, and I'm going to lose my sound or something? That's of course nonsense. If you hear some of the great players out there, like your Alan Vizzutis, your Jose Cibajas, these are guys who have all done this double-barreled career in jazz and classical music, and do it very well. And if you think that's not a concern that people have, like if I start working on this other thing, I'll lose the thing I have now, that's very common. I promise you. It's once you feel like you're in a groove at some sort of skill, you want to be very protective of it. But I'm here to tell you that adding jazz or some sort of improvisation to your skill set is only a positive, only a plus. So I'm just going to go through a few items here. Another thing that I heard someone say the other week at our Boston Brass seminar, this was Mike Pote, a band director. He said, you need to connect your ear to your instrument. And it's a very simple phrase, but when you think about the way that we learn our instruments when we're young, that's not a phrase that comes up, right? The way we learn our instruments when we're young is we look at a piece of paper, someone tells us that note is I don't know, a D or whatever it is. We try to remember where it is on the page. We remember which fingers move, and then we blow, and good luck if we manage to get the right note out, okay? So that's our learning process for the first very long period of our growth as a musician. And I think it's even harder if maybe you are a player on a transposing instrument. You're not playing necessarily concert pitch. That just adds one more barrier of ear training to the process. Um, so I just kind of want to give us some what I'm calling entry points into improvisation. Before we do that, I just want to play a bit for you. But it's not something I've prepared. It's something I need your help with. One of the very important entry points to improvisation is called aural transcription. That's AURAL, transcribing music by ear. And maybe some of you have already done this. If you've ever listened to the radio and tried to play along, you've been doing this. If you've ever listened to your favorite recordings of any style, it can be any style, classical music, jazz music, heavy metal, it's all good, right? That means you've been doing this aural transcription. So one of the things I could potentially embarrass myself here, but let's try not to do that. One of the things I pride myself on is trying to being able to play melodies without sheet music handy and doing it in whatever key is requested of me. So, can someone out there in the crowd name me up a tune, please a popular, famous tune that an average person might know, and also a key to play it in. If someone could suggest, maybe through the chat.
We'll give them a few seconds, and
That's
if they
fun.
come up with any. Oh, there you go. Can you see it?
Ooh, we got Gonna Fly Now in C minor. Yeah, I can do that. Let's give this a whirl. Let me move my microphones here. Well, dude, um. All right, so I won't go on. I just like trying to get like the basic elements of a melody. Thank you for that. Gonna Fly Now. Yeah, that's a good one. Anybody got any other suggestions? Any famous tunes? Any movie themes? You can be as merciless as you like on the key selection too.
Okay, I'll pop in.
Yeah, please.
Eye of the Tiger in B major.
Eye of the Tiger. Eye of the Tiger. Ooh. How about B minor?
Sounds good.
Okay, here we go. I'll start from those initial guitar riffs. Yeah, so there's not like any magic tricks happening there when I can just pull tunes out of my head. I do a lot of listening, and when I listen to songs, I listen actively. Right? That is, I'm always kind of analyzing what's going on in a song. I don't have perfect pitch or anything, but I am well practiced in my scales. And in that song, there is nothing outside of a minor scale. So let's just sing through it real quick on the melody. So which minor scale is used? So that's your natural minor scale. So when I sing 7 or 5, 7, that's a flat 7 relative to a major scale. So you got 5, 7, 5, 4, 3, 5, 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, 5, 4, 3, 5, 7, 1, 5, 4, 3. 5 4 3 3 1 3 4 4 4 4 3 4 5. So there's nothing exciting there happening really. So there's not a magic trick. Um, it's just scale work and knowing those relationships between notes. So if you ask something a little more chromatic, I might stumble a bit, right? But that one is not too bad. Uh, awesome. Thank you for that. Thanks for picking some stuff that I could rock on.
We've had one more suggestion if you're up to it.
Yeah, what's that?
Flintstones theme song in F sharp.
Oh yeah, why not? Flintstones, yeah, those great old TV shows are great. Flintstones, of course, is based on a very famous chord progression. It's the I've Got Rhythm. Mm, 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 mm. Wait, is that right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it's the I've Got Rhythm chord changes. So F sharp major. Yeah, okay. I might take this a little slow. Let's see. 1, 2, 1. Wilma.
There you go.
There we
So
go.
this is just the reason for all of our students to learn their scales, right?
Exactly, exactly. I'm now thinking through that tune. I'm not sure. Yeah, the first section does not have any chromatic notes in it, so it's all major scale. 5 1 1 6 5 1 5 4 3, and so on. The middle section's a little more tricky because it goes through the kind of bridge chord progression. 7. Wait, what is that? 7 2 2. Yeah. At any rate, it's easier for me to play it. I've never been good at solfege, which is I think a sad deficiency for me that I would hope you all would undertake on my behalf. But for me, the intervals feel a lot more natural just playing the horn rather than trying to sing them with pitch names like that. Just
So if
because
I
I've
could,
trained the intervals with my valves and ear so much.
sure, if I could just pop in while
Yeah,
we're on
please.
this great stuff. So can you kind of explain to us maybe different ways that you practice your scales and your modes, your minor, your major, besides playing through these popular songs?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, actually, and one of those things I can do uh, right now, I'm just going to share up a screen here. Uh, Here you go. You should probably see my iTunes window here. So we can just pick any old key here about that. Let me know if you can hear some tunes going on. It's just a drone. So one way to practice scales, and or you can even play etudes against this, is to because I'm really big on internalizing the physical feel of intervals. Right, and a great way to do that is with drones. So if I were to just play a scale against this, I think I've picked A flat here. that instance, I didn't really play a full scale, but I was kind of just feeling out the intervals this uh, against this drone, and you really start to not just hear but feel the relationships between notes as well. You start feeling, the the tuning and the beats against your lip. If especially on tuba, you get a lot of feedback back down the bell when you're playing with other people, especially. And so you get this kind of you actually get a sensation on the lips, when things are just in tune, or if things are appropriately out of tune, like if you're tuning a very narrow interval. So that's one way I do my scales very slowly and with pitch relationships in mind. And of course, the other is your speed and memory sort of parts of scales, and those can be practiced. Obviously you have your I don't know what we call it here in Illinois. I always called it the all-state rhythm. Bum 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 bum. It never hurts to have all your scales down cold like that in as many octaves as you can play them. Right? If you can play 2 octaves, you should always be working 2 octaves. If you can squeeze 3 octaves or 4 octaves out, then more power to you, right? Um, and that goes for all variations of your minor scale. In addition, scales in patterns like thirds, that is jumping a third and then stepping back, right? So. Or depending on how you like doing it, if you always want the pairs to jump upwards. There's a great video online about this. Some of you may have seen this. This guy's gotten rather popular on YouTube. He's a bass player named Adam Neely. He does a lot of music theory-based videos they can be ranging from very silly to very serious. And on one video he does, it's like a 4-hour long marathon of him practicing scales. And he basically does what I just did, but just every variation of it. Scales in thirds, ascending, descending, scales in fourth, fifths, every interval possible. And while I can't remember the last time I practiced scales for 4 hours in a row, it kind of gives you an idea for someone with his level of mastery, what they would do to make that all internalized in their playing. Because that's the ultimate goal, is to really not have to think anymore. Because when we're playing music, we have so many other things to think about rather than scales, right? We have musical message, we have time and rhythm, so many other things, groove, that need our attention rather than notes. So that's what all that work is towards. So thank you for that question. That's a great question.
So, how much would you say that you include this sort of scale work, working in thirds, playing on a drone? How much do you include that, like in your daily warm up, or what does your daily warm up sort of look
Uh, of course, yeah. A lot of people do have a regular warm up that they do, maybe something that is comfortable and helps them get settled into the day. Uh, I sometimes do a regular warm up, so maybe it's an irregular warm up, but I often have different components that I put into it based on what my goals for the day are, or maybe what I have to play later in the day. Maybe if it's a heavy day, I'm not going to warm up that much. It just depends. It's sort of a feel it out sort of thing. Once you've been playing for long enough, you can feel, where you need attention, basically. But during this kind of off summer, far better to be getting in full reps of warm ups and such. So I always like to be making sure that it's including certain things like chromatic patterns. Think of like the Clark studies. Uh, I think it's so many methods have used it at this point. It's just your chromatics. Right, and sliding that up and down, so we can get into issues of range and just
William,
smoothness and airflow. Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Is it possible to take your screen share off if you're
Oh,
done with
it
the Zoom?
absolutely is. Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you.
Sorry to jump in.
No,
This
no,
book is
that's
awesome. This is really cool.
yeah. Thank you for that. That always gets stuck on the. I've got two monitors here, and that was stuck on the other one. Um, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, and other things to think about for your warm up. Make sure you're playing soft and loud. I do a lot of exercises based out of Sam Palafian and Pat Sheridan's book, The Brass Gym.
Mhm.
So they have some exercises like soft touch, which is basically everything in their warm up is an excuse to play some kind of scale. If you can maybe see where my background comes from. So the soft touch is just playing soft in rhythm, some scale of your choice, or always making sure we have um, lip slurs in some form, making sure we have extreme ranges in our warm up as well, right? Making sure we're playing extreme low, extreme high, uh, some of the smoothest activity pieces or selections we can find from our repertoire, or just that have been written as a study. So in that way, I I think extremes are important. Other people advocate for a more moderate warm up. Um, Again, it's just something you have to sort of feel out. If something hurts, the warm up is not the time to test that, right? uh, that's for a later practice session. You don't want to hurt yourself first thing in the morning.
I'm glad you brought up the brass gym. Our master
Mm-hmm.
class clinician on Wednesday for euphonium, Aaron Vanderveel, he also brought up the brass gym.
Hmm.
And my teacher, Scott Watson, always had us buy brass gym as soon as we got to university. It's such a great book. And this kind of helps to show that something that works on euphonium can actually translate over to like, tuba, and it can also be applicable to cornet. So for all those who are watching that may not play tuba, these are all great ideas as well. So in continuing about warm ups and just preparing for playing, I like you mentioned that your warm up is different based on what you're going to play that day, what the setting is. So if it's chamber playing with Boston brass or
Mm-hmm.
something else. So can you maybe allude to us things you might do differently as compared like warming up for chamber playing versus warming up for ensemble playing, large ensemble, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing that might be different for that setup is the kind of horn I have to play. With tuba, we play multiple instruments based on our needs. So for brass quintet, I would be playing a very small tuba. For say orchestra or band, I would be playing a much larger C tuba. Now that doesn't necessarily change how I'm going to play the instrument. I'm still going to be blowing lots of air very slowly, um, very warmly. Uh, it's just might be the warm up is a matter of getting comfortable. There was a point in time where I was comfortable switching back and forth between my instruments like this. When tuba players kind of get into like an audition mode, and you're expected to do that, that is definitely something you have to be able to do. These days, I'm more focused on playing the small tuba, and actually, my big tuba is locked up at school, and I can't get in there. But that's okay. I'm surrounded by a lot of other tubas here in my apartment. I can't get away from them. So, but at any rate, yeah. So it's maybe just like a comfort easing in, and especially with something like Boston brass, I need to we travel basically every gig is travel, so you're in a different place, you're in a different um, different time zone, different state. Um, you just have to kind of get back that familiarity, that comfort level, and that's the principal thing that your warm up should do for you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had a question come through from our music director in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to know, what do you look for in a tuba part when playing band music, or what makes a great tuba part?
Oh, what makes a great tuba part? That's a great question because I'm not sure a lot of composers know that answer. Uh,
Amen.
there's a, don't get me wrong, I love a good Sousa march. I'm in love with being a bass player, right? You know, the art of timing your notes, weighting them correctly, having the right note length, having the proper style, and most importantly, as a tuba player, we got to think of ourselves as accompanists, right? It's our job to make everyone else sound good. And you think, well, why should I be subservient like that? Think about that for a little bit. Maybe the next time you're able to be in a rehearsal, it's not about being subservient. It's about being a good team player. It's about being a good um, a comrade, so to speak. So that's why I really enjoy, ensemble playing, chamber music playing. But as far as a good tuba part, composers would be wise to note. I mean, obviously, composers like John Williams would be an instance of someone who writes great tuba parts. And because what's in those parts? It's the whole range of playing. It's your bass lines, it's your harmonies, it's your melodies, it's your solos. It's high, it's low. It's trusting tuba players to play a melody. You know, that's definitely something we should be able to do. Oh, we got some feedback there. Any rate, yeah. So com- if you can look through a part and see all those elements, then you now you've got something on your hands. Composers like Prokofiev for the tuba do that. I'm not as hip to modern repertoire. I know there's a lot of composers now who are more hip to the abilities of the tuba. Um, I think, for example, my teacher at DePaul University, Floyd Cooley, used to be the tuba player with the San Francisco Symphony, and that orchestra worked with the composer John Adams a lot. You may know John Adams from Short Ride in a Fast Machine would be one of his more well-known pieces that's bridged over into the band world. And Floyd was working right there, sitting with the composer, and the composer asked him, well, "What would you like to see more of, in your parts?" And these were the sort of things that he named, more range, more presence, more independence. So definitely that's those are big items.
So I have sort of a personal question, but I think it's something that a lot of our tuba players here in the Salvation Army setting should hear about.
Mm-hmm.
So, when I was growing up in high school playing tuba, participating in solo and ensemble, I didn't have a private teacher. My own high school band director was a trumpet player, and the Salvation Army Library has such a very small handful of tuba solos. So when it came to picking solo literature, even knowing about solo literature, I ended up playing euphonium solos in my B flat tuba because, that's what I heard on albums from like Derek Kane and Steve Beat. So can you talk a little bit about tuba solo literature and some of those composers and compositions that we should be looking for?
Right. Well, that's interesting that you stole repertoire from another instrument because that's pretty standard in the world of tuba. Even today, our repertoire is not so extensive that we can just, especially if we want to play a wide variety of music. Tuba music as solo repertoire sort of began with two pieces. That was the Ray Vaughan Williams tuba concerto in, what was that, 1954 or something, 56, I want to say. And a few years in that area, also the Hindemith tuba sonata. And the Hindemith tuba sonata is not beginner material. It's an almost unplayable piano part in difficulty. And as soon as the tuba player hears what the piano is doing, it becomes almost an unplayable tuba part because you're trying to set it right with the piano so that it all makes sense. Uh, and then the other piece, the Vaughan Williams tuba concerto, is quite advanced. I mean, it's a lot of range, um, uh, very tricky for sure. Even to this day, I mean, tuba players can spend hours upon hours on that, hours, weeks, days, months, and it's still very tricky. So those kind of formed the first core of the tuba repertoire. But I think what you're seeing now is a lot more uh, tuba players and brass players taking matters into our own hands and actually writing music. And that's where most of our future repertoire is going to come from, is going to be from us or from you out there. So be thinking about that.
Right, and it's an exciting time with so much tuba solo and chamber literature coming out even day by day.
Right.
Um, really cool to see. So
Yeah,
we've had a
I've
question.
actually added one piece I wanted to mention on that. And this was
Sure.
from the session I had last week with Joanna Hersey. She has a piece that's somewhat based on improvisation and drone work. So this really spoke to me, and it also has a score that is laid out like a map. So it's like a historical look at the historical figure and composer Hildegard von Bingen. So all of these, there's a drone that plays throughout, and on the map, the score, are little selections in little areas of the map, and the map represents a monastery and areas of the monastery that where activities might have been taking place. And so at your leisure, you can adventure yourself, select the order that these selections are going to come in, play them against the drone. You can even improvise as you like in that sort of chant-ish style. So that piece really spoke to me. One, because I love the drone. Two, I love the improvisation. Three, I love the style of the chant. And four, I love maps. And it was a very nice kind of illustrated map. And I believe the piece was called 1112, as in the year 1112, 1112, and that's Joanna Hersey. So that would be a very cool piece to check out in terms of something that I had never seen before. I'm sure someone has done that in terms of like a map or different sorts of selections. But the way she laid it out it really spoke to me.
I'm gonna have to check that out. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, it is.
We've had a question come through on the chat,
Mm-hmm.
and they're asking in terms of tuba and specifically for a beginner, what sort of exercises and routines can you do to gain more lung capacity?
Mm. Great question. And of course, lung capacity is something that is fixed for us, but we can always learn how to use more of it or as much as possible. And I hope we never think that um, you know size or lung capacity is a restriction to playing the tuba. We just need to be very efficient about how we use our air. So thing one is we need to be very comfortable with being very full of air, right? So if we take a breath just to speak a sentence, you don't even have to breathe. I can even exhale, and I can keep speaking at a normal volume, right? If you do that on the tuba, uh, you lose your air very quickly, right? And so we always want to be operating in the top, I would say half. I always say the top half, but the top 75% of our lung capacity, right? So taking a breath just to speak is not enough to play the tuba. So let's try something together just towards getting very full. I'm going to have us, we're going to inhale for 6 beats, and then we're going to 6 more times in a row, we're just going to sip air. So this is a quick version of it. In, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we should be about as full as you think you can get. And then we're going to go sip, 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 sip. Like really, really stretching out and getting full. And then we'll just explode the air out or something. We'll just let it out. Haven't thought about the end of the exercise yet. So let's try that. So get really empty and get ready to get as full as you can in 6 counts. And then 6 beats of sipping after that. Here we go. 4, 5, and 6. In. Sip. So those last couple ones, you should start feeling a stretch. I particularly feel it in my upper lungs here. Okay. Now, breathing for the tuba, you know, we want to breathe in order to expand, right? As opposed to the other way around. I think that's a very Arnold Jacobs saying. Breathe to expand, don't expand to breathe. So if you go, like you puff yourself up, you can't expect air to enter your body, right? So we're going to be making sure we're sucking air from the lips, and you can check that by putting your finger in front of your mouth, making sure there's suction as opposed to, throat inhalation. And you can turn that around, and if you inhale like that, that kind of gasp, and then do the reverse of that and blow on your palm, like a ha kind of breath. Try that for me. Like really forcing it out of your gut. There's like no air, right? There's no airflow. And that has to do with the pressures involved. We want our interior to be a very low pressure area. To do that, we have to make a high pressure area here at the lips for the air to pass over. So instead of making a gaping mouth in order to breathe really big, you want your mouth to be rather small, right? That creates this phenomenon called the venturi, which is where air will rush past a small opening into an area of low pressure. So the kind of principle that jet engines work on, or if you've ever seen in car racing, the car pulls into the pit stop and the fuel gets injected whoosh, into the car really fast. It's through these kind of principles, because if you've ever tried to empty a 2 liter of soda and you just flip it over, it barely trickles out, right? You need to like swirl it up so you get that high speed, and that's what we do when we make our mouth really small, breathing into a low pressure area that is our lungs.
So besides this sort of breathing gym exercises, which are fantastic,
Sure.
and I highly recommend, are there other sorts of physical exercises that we can do to help improve our playing?
Certainly. I mean, the first I would just say is just general health. Of course, is very important to being a wind player. Some of the things we do, can be, at least breathing wise, can be on the level of professional athletes in terms of the amount of air we're inputting and outputting. Tuba players, anybody can have lung capacities from, I would say, 3 liters to 7 liters or 8 liters, depending on if you're just massive. So that's a lot of air going in and out. And a tuba player, say if you're playing something really powerful, the Ride of the Valkyries or something, just to pick something obvious, you can be using all of that air over and over about every second that you're playing, right? And you're breathing like every 1 to 2 seconds. So we have to be able to stay relaxed while moving that much air, be a little comfortable with maybe being dizzy. We sort of practice our breathing to that point, and while also trying to stay mentally focused on making music. That's a massive barrier to tuba playing, is the physical nature of it. Um, so trying to make those elements as easy as possible, whether that's the breathing gym or some other method, that definitely has to be a consideration, especially for tuba players.
Mhm. Now, in terms of equipment for those tuba players that are here on this Zoom,
Hmm.
um, what is your determining factor between the size of the tuba that you're going to use depending on the gig,
Right.
and then what are some other considerations for the mouthpiece that you're going to use?
Right. That's a loaded question for tuba because tuba has the most variety of any instrument in how they're made, what they look like, how much they weigh, what they're shaped like. Uh, so um, there's of course considerations of like, do you play a piston or a rotary instrument, and you maybe over time you will have uh, preferences yourself. At this point, I'm happy to pick up whatever tuba works, and and see what I can do with it. But I've definitely had phases where I've uh, liked both. Of course, one of the big hurdles to a young tuba player is the size of the instrument, and that I think maybe I mentioned that lung capacity should not be a barrier to playing the tuba. For me, maybe physical size might be the one barrier that not doesn't mean if you're smaller that you can't play the tuba, but I think it could really adversely affect your enjoyment of playing the tuba if it is uh, hard to lift or control. So always remember when we're playing, and this goes for all brass instruments except maybe the French horn. You do your weird thing, French horn players. But remember, we have two hands here to deal with, and the tuba is sitting in our lap. Or if you're a trumpet player, you have your two hands and your horn is hovering out in front of you. But the principle is the same. We have the strength hand that holds the instrument, your left hand, and you have your finesse hand that moves the valves. The finesse hand may lift no weight. There's no weight should be lifted by this hand, right? Now, some tubas have the bell up, or I'm sorry, bell to the right version. So it'd be sort of this side, and the valves are top action. This one's a little harder because the horn is leaning to the right, and your valves are on the right. So there's a lot of desire to grab the horn and wiggle the valves like this. We got to make sure we're reaching around though with this hand. It's very firm, right? So that this hand is free. So very important on that. Uh, that if you have something like a thumb ring, that you're not putting your finger through it to like grip. I don't know if you can see this, like the thumb ring there, up, to like hook it on, just to kind of like, you don't want to be grabbing the instrument. For me, I put the thumb rest in a place where I can rest my thumb on it as just like a reference point. That is, I can take my hand off and then I can return it to the instrument really quickly by just touching my thumb to that point, and my fingers will be aligned with the valves. So no, wringing your thumb through it if you can help it.
So we've had another question come through on the chat, and I think this is a great one. So they want to know, what is your approach to playing in the low register, and what are some exercises tubas can work on when playing low notes?
Okay. Uh, well, first of all, if you're starting from a beginner or a sort of intermediate stage, and you're just looking to expand your range, so to speak, nothing beats learning chromatically. There's nothing that you can't learn from your best notes in the middle of your range, right? Those notes should all theoretically be relaxed, open, good sounding, so an F, right? So now all of your notes on brass instruments, all of your best notes, say your open notes, are immediately adjacent to all of your worst notes, right? So on cornet, your low C is adjacent to C sharp, right? And of course, it's the same on tuba. We have all the same fingering patterns. So this idea of chromatically matching, I call it cloning your notes, and that's why this particular exercise, or whatever version of that we've all done in the past, needs this extra layer of thought put into it. That we're not doing it just to get some intervals and wiggle our valves, right? It's that first note is the note we're trying to clone, right? We're trying to make everything be the same quality. It's not da 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 da. It's do with the same airflow, as close to the same embouchure as your instrument requires. With some instruments, you may have to shift more to get certain intervals, but ideally staying as close to that first tone as possible. So I would start there with an exercise like that. So say we're starting in the mid-low range, somewhere like B flat. All right, we're just trying to get as much cloning of sound quality as possible. And the moment things start to tighten up, that means we're probably blowing too hard, especially on the tuba is a real concern. Tuba is a low pressure instrument. Our bodies are a low pressure instrument. We want everything to be kind of equal out. So if we force high pressure air into the instrument, it gets really crass, really tight. So really relaxed, fog up the mirror kind of air required down there.
Mhm. All fantastic stuff. We just got a few minutes left. I'm just going to ask if, in wrapping up, if there are any words of encouragement or advice for developing tubists as they look to grow and become advanced tubists.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I was just thinking about on the subject of improvising. That I have a book that's very helpful on the theory side of that. It's called The Jazz Theory Book by Mark Levine. But the quote that he has in the inside cover of that, I think, is applicable to all musicians. And he's speaking in this case of improvisation, but you could say playing. Playing or improvisation is 1% inspiration. The other 99% is knowable, doable, learnable. Right. That's really reassuring, right? I think that if we kind of pick our course and we study it, seriously, it's all doable. Everyone who plays the tuba is an average person, right? They just kind of toot it into a tube a little longer than the next person, and then they kind of stuck at it. There's no it's not like a genius element. We're not rocket scientists, right? And I would be wary of anyone who claims that that level of skill. I think that's very important to know that everything's knowable, doable, learnable, whatever order you want to say those in. I kind of also want to leave you with. I talked about droning and improvising, and what you might want to take into your own practice sessions from here, and that is, I would say, well more than 50% of my personal practice time is based on improvisation. And why is that? Mostly it's because improvising is no different than just playing your instrument anyway, right? It would be like saying, I'm not a jazz player, but maybe if you just practiced your arpeggios by adding a seventh to them, maybe then you'd have some jazz vocabulary, right? So instead of just playing, traditional triad arpeggios. It's like improvising is just more playing of the instrument. It's just guided by your own decisions. Uh, so that's why I do so much droning. I'll make up a lot of my own warm up activities, of course, based on a lot of the things I know and some of the things I talked about, your lip slurs, your scale patterns. Um, will be just I'll just make them up. I don't have time to go open a book. I know I want to play some scales. I can make up an activity that gives me scales, right? So that's kind of the idea behind that, to start becoming more independent with your ear, and less based on what something on a piece of paper is feeding you. So that comes back around to connect your ear to your instrument is I think the ultimate takeaway here. And any way you can do that, whether it's playing along with your favorite recording, uh, or just making up tunes, or even getting into composing yourself. I mean, we need you. We need composers out there. So give it a whack.
That's
That would be
awesome. And I think
wonderful.
a really great piece of advice. Definitely something that I personally don't do enough of in my own practice that I probably should increase. So thanks for the encouragement and just the encouragement that you've given to our kids today. I think
Oh, absolutely.
there was just so much good stuff in there. And we just thank you so much for being willing to share your time and expertise with us today. So huge round of applause from everybody.
Oh,
Um,
thank you all so much for having me.
yeah, thanks so much.